The band was between songs when my brother decided to make me the entertainment. I had been standing against the back wall of the bass club with a paper cup of coffee going cold in my hand, doing the thing I had gotten very good at over the years, which was taking up as little room as possible. It was a combined social, his infantry battalion and my squadron pushed into the same low room with string lights and a rented sound system. The night before the real workup began, I knew maybe a third of the faces. The rest were his, young and loud and happy to be young and loud, and my brother Cole stood in the middle of them like he had invented the whole evening. He was 3 beers in and glowing with it. When he saw me, he grinned the grin our mother loved and I had learned to be careful of. And he crossed the floor and took my wrist, not hard, just certain the way he took everything. And he turned me toward his Marines like he was presenting a prize at a fair. "Say it, sis," he said, loud enough to pull heads around. "Tell my Marines your big scary call sign." Somebody laughed before there was even a joke, because the setup was the joke, the idea of me having a call sign at all. "Come on," Cole said, warming to the crowd. "Should we guess? Sparkles, bake sale." The squad came apart laughing. A lance corporal near the cooler, a kid named Dominic Hale, who could not have been more than 21, laughed so hard he had to set his drink down. Cole raised his bottle to them like a man accepting applause. My little brother, the sergeant, the real Marine, showing the boys that the woman from the helicopter squadron was his sister, and she was harmless. I did not say anything at first. That surprised no one, least of all me. I had spent 13 years learning how to hold a thing steady while it burned. And one of the first lessons was that the fastest way to lose a room is to fight it for the microphone. So I stood there with my dead coffee and let the laugh run its course. And I counted, the way I always counted, the exits and the ranks and the temperature of the room, because that habit never turns off. Not at a party, not anywhere. What I noticed while Cole was still riding the laugh was the man by the coffee urn. He was older than the boys, a first sergeant, 40 if he was a day, built square and quiet with the kind of stillness that senior enlisted Marines earn and then never lose. He had a cup of coffee in his hand, because men like him do not drink at a function where their Marines can see them, and he had been half smiling at Cole's routine the way you smile at a young sergeant showing off. Indulgent, a little tired. Then Cole said the words, "big, scary, call sign," and something in the first sergeant's face changed. Not much. A narrowing. He lowered the coffee slowly from his mouth, and he looked at me. Really looked, the way you look at a face you're trying to match to a memory you were not expecting to need tonight. Okay, Cole said, spreading his hands, playing it out. "Give the people what they want. What do they call you up there in the wild blue?" I looked at my brother, and then I looked past him at the first sergeant, and I made a decision that I want to be honest about, because it was not a noble one. I was tired. I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. I had been made small at that man's kitchen table and at 100 cookouts and in the quiet math of my own family for as long as I could remember, and for one moment I did not have it in me to protect him from the truth the way I usually did. So I said it, plainly, the way you say your own name. "Iron Lady." For a second, nothing happened, and Cole even started to laugh again, because to him the words meant nothing. They were just 2 words. They could have been the punchline he was hoping for. Then the first sergeant's coffee cup slipped out of his hand. It did not so much fall as leave him, the way a thing leaves your grip when your body forgets it is holding anything at all. It hit the tile and cracked, coffee going everywhere, and the sound of it cut the laughter off cleaner than any order could have. The first sergeant was already moving. He came up off the stool he had been leaning against so fast that it scraped and toppled, and he stood at something close to attention in the middle of a party in front of his own Marines, staring at me like the floor had opened. "That's you," he said. It was not a question, but he asked it anyway. Quiet. Wrecked. "Iron Lady, that's you." The room did not understand yet, but it went still the way a flight line goes still when a rotor spools down, all that noise draining out of the air at once. And my brother stood in the middle of it with his bottle halfway to his mouth, looking from the first sergeant to me and back, the grin dying on his face by degrees, understanding only that something had happened and that for once in his life, he was the last man in the room to know what it was. I put my coffee cup down on the nearest table, and I walked out to the smoking deck because I needed air and because I did not trust what my face was doing. People think the hard part of my job is the fear. It is not. I made my peace with fear a long time ago, in the back seat of an aircraft over a country most of those boys inside had been in grade school for. The hard part, the part no one warns you about, is the years afterward. The being small on purpose. The learning to fold yourself down so that the people you love do not have to feel smaller standing next to you. That is the discipline they do not give you a ribbon for. I stood at the rail with my hands flat on the cold metal, and I made them be still, because they wanted to shake, not from anything inside that room, but from the name. I had not said it out loud in a long time. Iron Lady. A radio call sign is a small thing, a convenience. A way for a man on the ground to know which aircraft is talking to him without knowing or caring who is in it. But some of them stop being small. Some of them get said by enough frightened men on enough bad nights that they take on a weight. And then they belong to those men as much as to you. And you stop being able to say them lightly. I was a major now. I had close to 3,000 flight hours and a coat in my closet with ribbons on it that my family had never once asked me to explain. I flew the AH-1Z Viper, and before that the older Cobras, and I had been doing it long enough that the young ones in my own squadron treated me like a piece of the airframe, permanent and slightly mythological. In one particular infantry battalion, in only that one, my call sign got traded around like a rumor, the pilot who would not leave, and I had spent 13 years making sure it stayed a rumor and did not follow me home. There is a version of me that lives only in the aircraft, and she is not small, and she does not fold. In the cockpit, I am precise and unhurried and a little frightening, and I have been told this by people who mean it as a compliment, and by one or two who did not. My lieutenants come to me the way you come to a piece of weather you respect. And when they have done something stupid, I do not raise my voice, because I learned a long time ago that the quietest voice in a loud moment is the one everybody obeys. I can hold an aircraft steady in a wind that is trying to throw it into a mountain. I can talk a 19-year-old through the worst minute of his life, with my pulse never going above resting. That woman is real. She is me. And every time I drove home to a family dinner, I left her parked on the flight line, because there was no room for her at my father's table. And I had learned to walk into that house as the smaller sister and leave her keys in the aircraft. That is the split I had been living in for 13 years, and I had gotten so practiced at it that I no longer noticed the seam. There was the major who men trusted with their lives on a radio, and there was the sister who let her little brother turn her into a party trick, and I kept them so carefully apart that I could stand in a room and be both at once and not feel the contradiction tearing at me. Until my brother said 2 words, and a first sergeant dropped his coffee, and the seam ripped straight down the middle in front of everyone. Through the window, I could see the first sergeant. He had not sat back down. He was standing near the spilled coffee, letting a younger Marine mop it up around his boots, and he was still looking at the door I had walked out of. Like a man who has seen something he waited a very long time to see and is afraid it will be gone when he blinks. I did not know his name yet. I would learn it soon enough. But I knew the shape of what was coming, the way you know weather, and I stood at that rail and let myself feel, just for a minute, the strange grief of being about to be seen. To understand why I let it stand, you have to understand the house I grew up in, and the man who ran it. Our father, Wade Cross, was a Marine before he was anything else, including a father. He did 22 years in the infantry and retired a master sergeant, and he came home from all of it with a bad back. A chest full of stories he doled out like rationed water, and one unshakable conviction about what counted. What counted was mud. What counted was the ground and the men on it and the weight you carried across it on your own 2 feet. Everything else was support. Everything else existed to serve the rifleman, and while he would allow that support was necessary, he would never in his life allow that it was equal. I was the older child, and I was the one who wanted to fly. I do not remember choosing it so much as recognizing it, the way you recognize your own name. When I told him I had a slot for flight school, he was quiet for a while, and then he said the thing I have never quite been able to put down. Bus drivers with rank, he said, not cruel, which was the worst part, just certain. He patted my hand. You'll be fine, sweetheart. Stay up where it's safe. My mother, Diane, was at the stove, and she did not turn around. That was her whole role in these conversations, the not turning around. She loved me. I never doubted it. But she had made a study of keeping the peace in that house, and peace meant letting my father set the value of things. There is a photograph somewhere of the day I was winged, the day they pinned the gold naval aviator wings on my chest after 2 years of the hardest work I had ever done. In the photograph, I am grinning like a fool because I had earned the thing I had wanted since I was a girl. My father is in the photograph too, standing a little apart, and if you look at his face, you can see that he is proud in the way you are proud of a nice car, from the outside, admiring it, without ever wanting to be seen needing it. He shook my hand that day. He did not hug me, and on the drive to the restaurant afterward, he spent 20 minutes telling a story about a machine gunner he had served with in a war I was not alive for, because that, to him, was what the day was really about. The reminder that whatever I had just earned, it was a support to the real thing, and the real thing had a name, and it was infantry. 3 years later, my brother Cole graduated from boot camp, and my father drove 11 hours to be there, and he wept at the sight of my baby brother in his dress blues, actual tears down his face, in front of everyone, unashamed. I was happy for Cole. I want to be clear about that. I stood there and I was happy for my brother and proud of him, and I clapped until my hands hurt. And I also stood there and did the arithmetic that a person does when they have been doing it their whole life. The arithmetic of a father who could not hug his daughter on the day she was winged, but wept openly at his son's graduation from basic training. And I understood, not for the first time and not for the last, exactly where I stood in the ledger of that family. Below the mud. Always below the mud. I never said any of this to anyone. What was there to say? My father was a good man who had given the country 22 hard years, and he loved his children in the only currency he had, and it was not his fault that the currency was minted in mud. I told myself that. I still tell myself that. But a child keeps a very accurate ledger, and mine had 30 years of entries in it, and every single one of them said the same thing. Cole was small then, 9 or 10, sitting on the kitchen floor with a toy, and he heard it the way children hear the weather in a house. He learned it in his body before he could have explained it. His sister flew, and flying was the safe thing, the lesser thing, the thing you did up where it was safe while the real Marines were down in it. By the time he was grown, by the time he had a contract of his own and a father who lit up like a struck match at the sight of it, that verdict was just a fact of the world to him. It was not even an insult. You do not insult the sky for being the sky. I let it stand for the same reason my mother never turned around, because the alternative was a scene at my father's table, and because some part of me, the part I am least proud of, believed him. When you are told a thing gently and often enough by the people who are supposed to know you best, you stop being able to tell the difference between their voice and your own. I flew combat tours. I was decorated for something I do not talk about. And I still, at 39 years old, standing on a smoking deck with a name in my mouth I had not said in years, half believed that the mud was realer than the air, because my father had told me so while patting my hand. That is the wound, not the mockery at the party. The party was just the scar tissue showing. The wound was older, and it was mine, and I had carried it up into the sky and back more times than I could count. Here is the part my brother did not know, that no one at that party knew, because the ground had already shifted under the whole room and the room had not felt it yet. 4 days before the social, I had been in the squadron ready room when the tasking came down, and I had learned that for the entire workup, and then for the deployment after it, my squadron would be the close air support for exactly one infantry battalion, Cole's battalion. When the assignment posted, my friend and wingman, a captain named Simone Vega, read it off the screen and then read it again. And then she turned around in her chair with a look on her face that I did not like. "Guess whose grunts we've got for the whole workup," she said. "The whole rotation. Your kid brother's battalion, Delaney." I did not answer right away. I walked over and read it myself, because I needed to see it with my own eyes, and not through hers. There it was, the battalion. And when I scrolled down through the Manning roster, the way you do when you are looking for something you are afraid to find, I found it. A company first sergeant, listed by name, Gabriel Reyes. I knew that name. I had been trying not to know it for 13 years. Reyes had been a sergeant in the fall of 2013, one of the voices on the ground the day everything went wrong on that ridge, one of the men whose lives got weighed and found to be worth staying for. I had never met him. On a radio, you almost never meet the men you are dying for. You know their call signs and the sound of their breathing when they are running, and then the aircraft turns for home, and you never see their faces. But I had kept a few of the names, not on purpose. Some names just stay. For 13 years, I had done a careful, quiet thing, which was to never look those men up. It would have been easy. The unit was a matter of record, the reunions had a page online. There was a foundation now with a scholarship in the name of a corporal who had not made it off a different hill a year later. I could have found every one of them in an afternoon, and I never did, because to look them up would have been to walk back onto that ridge, and I had spent a great deal of energy building a life at a safe distance from it. I sent money to the scholarship every year, anonymously, through a lawyer, so that not even the accepting hand would know whose it was. That was the closest I let myself get. Money in an envelope with no name on it. It was, I can see now, the same move I made at my family's table. Do the thing. Take no space for it. Leave no name. And now the Marine Corps, in its vast indifference to my careful distances, had put that name on a Manning roster and slid it across a screen to me in a ready room, and had assigned me to keep his company alive for a year. There is a kind of order to the universe that feels less like fate than like being caught. I read Reyes's name, and I felt caught, 13 years into a getaway I had never admitted I was making. Vega watched me read it. She knew a version of the story, the official version, the version with the citation, and she was decent enough not to say any of it out loud in a room full of junior officers. "You want me to see about a swap?" she said quietly. It was not really a question. She was offering me a door. "I can talk to operations. Somebody else takes the battalion, you take the artillery chute on the other range. Nobody would blink." I thought about it. I want to be honest that I thought about it standing there in the ready room, because the easy thing, the thing I had done my whole life, was to arrange the world so that I never had to be too much in front of the people I loved. A swap would have been so simple. I could have flown a different range for the whole rotation, and my brother would never have known his sister was ever anywhere near his war. "No," I said. Vega raised an eyebrow. "I'm not going to reshuffle a battalion's air because it's awkward at Thanksgiving," I said. "They're going overseas. They should have the best section on the flight line, and that's mine, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't to spare my brother a feeling." She held my eyes for a second, then nodded once, the way she did when she agreed with something and knew better than to make a speech about it. And that was that. 4 days before Cole grabbed my wrist and turned me into a punchline, I had already quietly decided that I was going to be the air over his head for the next year, whether he ever understood what that meant or not. The ground had moved. The room at the party just had not felt it yet. After the coffee cup hit the tile, my brother did the thing my brother has always done when the ground goes out from under him. He reached for the crowd. He could not have told you what had just happened. He only knew that a senior enlisted Marine he respected had come to his feet like a private at the sight of his sister, and that the room had gone quiet, and that the quiet was pointed at him and not at me. A better man might have stopped there and asked a question. Cole reclaimed the microphone. "All right, so you know the first sergeant," he said, and he laughed, a little too hard, patting the air. "Small corps, everybody knows everybody. Doesn't make you a war hero, sis." Nobody laughed with him. That was new. Hale, the young lance corporal, was looking at the first sergeant's face, and then at mine, and you could see him doing arithmetic he did not have all the numbers for. Reyes said nothing. He just looked at Cole for a long moment, the way a father looks at a son who has said something that cannot be unsaid. And then he bent and picked up the pieces of his own cup off the floor, which somehow landed harder than anything he could have said. I did not correct my brother. I want you to notice that, because it matters later. I did not stand in that room and read him my record. I picked up my cover and I told the squadron duty officer I was leaving, and I went home to my quarters and I lay awake looking at the ceiling. The phone call came at 06:30 the next morning. My mother. Of course it was my mother. Cole had called her the night before with his version, the version where his sister had embarrassed him in front of his Marines, and she had lain awake too, and now she was calling to do the job she had done my whole life. "He didn't mean anything by it, honey," she said, before I had finished saying hello. "You know how he gets when he's had a couple. He feels terrible." "Does he?" I said. "He does. And Delaney." She paused, gathering herself for the ask. "Can't you just smooth it over before they deploy? You don't want him going overseas with this between you. For the family. Just let it go, like you always do. You're so good at that. You're so good at that." She meant it as a compliment. She had been handing me that compliment my whole life, The way you hand a mule its load, and I had been taking it the same way. And standing in my quarters at 06:30 in the morning with the phone against my ear, I understood for the first time exactly what she was praising me for. She was praising me for disappearing quietly, for being so good at making myself small that I could do it in front of a room full of Marines and my own brother without leaving a mark. "I have to go, Mom," I said. "We start the workup today." I hung up before she could ask me again to be the bigger person, because I had finally noticed that being the bigger person, in my family, had only ever meant agreeing to be treated like a smaller one. Cole texted me twice that day. The first one said, "Sorry about last night, didn't know you knew the first sergeant." The second one, an hour later, said, "Mom says you're being weird about it." Read those two messages back to back, and you have the entire architecture of my family in your hand. An apology that was not an apology because it apologized for my knowing the first sergeant rather than for anything he had done. And then, when that did not land, the fallback to the family's oldest reliable tool, the reframing of my hurt as my defect. You are being weird about it, not, I did something. You are being difficult. I had heard that sentence my whole life. I had usually answered it by making myself easy again. I did not answer the texts. I went to work. And at work, that afternoon, I made myself say the thing out loud to Vega, because I have learned that the surest way to keep from folding is to tell one honest person what you actually intend, so that folding later would mean lying to their face. "My brother made me say my call sign at the party last night," I said, like a joke, in front of Reyes. Vega went still. She had been checking a kneeboard, and she set it down. "In front of Reyes," she said slowly. "Does Reyes know it's you?" "He knows now," I said. He dropped his coffee. She was quiet for a second, and then she said the thing that only a friend who is also a professional can say. "You could still take the other range. Nobody would think anything of it. Family and combat don't mix, everybody knows that." "I know," I said. "I'm flying the battalion." "Delaney?" "I'm flying the battalion, Simone. If I take the other range now, I'm not protecting Cole. I'm protecting the story where I'm the small one. I've been protecting that story for 30 years. I'm tired of it." I picked up the kneeboard and handed it back to her. "They're going overseas. They get me. That's the end of it." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she almost smiled and she said, "Okay, Iron Lady." And it was the first time in years anyone had said the name to me on purpose. And she said it like it belonged to me, and I had to turn around and pretend to look for something in my locker so she would not see what it did to my face. I did not decide to humiliate my brother. I want to be clear about that because it would have been easy, and easy was the temptation. I could have gone to the workup with the citation in my hand and made sure it got read in front of him. I could have pulled rank in a dozen small ways that would have left him bleeding in front of his Marines for a year. I had the material, 13 years of it. And I understood, standing on the flight line that first gray morning with the turbines winding up behind me, that a part of me wanted to, and that the part of me that wanted to was the same 9-year-old sister who had heard bus drivers with rank and said nothing. So I made a different decision, and I made it without spectacle, which is the only way I know how to make the ones that matter. I decided I was going to do my job, in front of him. That was all. I was not going to hide from my own brother, and I was not going to break him either. He could learn the way I had learned everything worth knowing, which was by watching it happen and being changed by it. And if the sky was going to teach Cole what his sister actually did, up where it was safe, then it could teach him. I did not have to be the one holding the ruler. There is a discipline in that, and I want to name it, because it is the discipline the whole channel of my life has run on. It would have felt so good to make him see. That is the trap. The hunger to be understood, when it has been starved for 30 years, will make you cruel if you let it drive, and it will dress the cruelty up as fairness. I had watched other people do it, stand over someone who had wronged them and make them pay in front of an audience. And I understood the appetite completely, and I knew that if I fed it, I would become something I did not want to be, and worse, I would prove my father right. I would have made it about me. The quietest, hardest thing was to simply do the work well and let the work speak, and to want nothing from my brother in the moment except that he watch. Not that he apologize, not that he grovel, just that he watch and be changed if he was capable of it, and if he was not, then that was his to carry, and not mine. I told Vega as much on the walk to the aircraft. I'm flying lead the whole workup, I said. No swaps, no reshuffle to spare anybody. If my brother wants to know what I do, he's about to have a front row seat. And if he doesn't get it, Vega said. Some guys never do. Then he doesn't get it, I said. But it won't be because I hid it from him. That night, before the first live day, I did a thing I had not done in a long time. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk in my quarters, the one I keep shut, and I took out the folded citation and the small flat box next to it. And I read the words I had read maybe twice since they gave them to me. Helmand Province, the date, the act described in the flat, careful language the Marine Corps uses when it is trying to say that someone did something no reasonable person should have done and lived. And a name near the bottom that was not mine. The name of the man who had been in the front seat. I read it, and I put it back, but I did not shut the drawer all the way. I left it open a crack, the way you leave a door open for someone you are finally ready to let back into the house. Then I went to sleep, because in the morning I was going to fly, and the mud was going to find out what the air was for. The workup was supposed to be routine. Most of it was. For 3 days, I flew my section over a range the size of a small county, a stretch of high desert scrub, and dry washes, and hills the color of old bone. While my brother's battalion practiced the thing they would do for real in a few months. We rehearsed the dance between the men on the ground and the aircraft over their heads, the careful, deadly choreography of close air support. Where a voice on a radio tells you where the friendly Marines are and where they are not, and you put steel exactly on the second thing and never, ever on the first. It is a dance built entirely on trust. The men on the ground have to trust that the pilot they cannot see will not make a mistake that ends them. And they learn, over a workup, whose voice on the net they can trust. They learned mine fast. That is not pride. It is just what happened. There is a flatness that comes into my voice when I am working, a thing I cannot fake and cannot turn off, and grunts hear it and they settle, because a calm voice overhead, in a bad moment, is worth more than any amount of firepower. By the second day, the companies were requesting my section by call sign. And on the radio, all day long, in the mouths of my brother's Marines, was the name he had used as a punchline 4 nights before. Iron Lady, this is such and such, we've got you. Iron Lady, cleared hot. My brother heard it on the net every hour of every day, in the voices of men whose respect he wanted more than anything in the world, and I do not know exactly when it started to land on him, but I know it landed. On the second day, there was a moment that I did not think much of at the time, and have thought about a great deal since. Cole's platoon was moving on an objective and got hung up on a mock strongpoint, and the ground commander called for a show of force, which is exactly what it sounds like, an aircraft coming in low and loud and fast to remind everyone who owns the sky. I brought the Viper down the length of that valley at the height of a telephone pole, and the speed of a thing that means it, and I heard, over the open net, some young Marine let out a whoop, the involuntary kind, the kind you cannot help when 8 tons of gunship goes over your head on your side. And I knew Cole was down there in that dust, with his face turned up. I knew he was watching the aircraft, and did not yet know his sister was flying it. I did not do it for him. You cannot fly like that for a person, only for the men on the ground. But I would be lying if I said I did not think, for 1/2 of 1 second as I pulled off target, there. That is the safe place you have been laughing at. By the 3rd night, the whole battalion was calling me Iron Lady, and it had stopped being a joke to exactly 1 man in it. And he had gone very quiet, and he had started watching the flight line in the evenings the way a person watches something they are trying to understand. Then, on the 4th day, the workup stopped being a rehearsal. It was late afternoon, the light going long and gold, and a squad had dismounted to move up a wash on foot while their vehicle waited on the high ground. I was in a lazy orbit at altitude, watching, listening, when I heard the vehicle commander's voice come up an octave, and then I saw it. The truck on the high ground had started to slide. The edge of the wash had looked solid and was not undercut by an old flood, and the whole shelf of it gave way at once, and the vehicle went over onto its side and down the slope in a slow roll that put it at the bottom of the wash. On top of the ground, the squad had just moved through, in a cloud of dust with its wheels still turning. For a few seconds, the net was chaos. Voices piled on voices. Somebody was hurt. The squad on foot was now below their own truck, with a live range around them, and dust everywhere, and no one able to see anyone. This was the moment on a real deployment when frightened men make the mistakes that get more men killed. And down in that wash, I would learn later, was my brother's squad and my brother. I have been in this exact shape of moment before, and my body knows it before my mind does. The heart rate does not go up. That sounds like a boast, and it is not. It is just a thing that happened to me a long time ago on a ridge and never unhappened. Everything slows and goes quiet and very clear. And the part of me that is a frightened person steps back, and the part of me that is an instrument steps forward. I have made a kind of uneasy peace with that instrument. She saved a dozen men once and could not save the one in front of her. And she has been waiting 13 years for the next bad afternoon, and here it was. I did not know that then. On the radio, you do not get to know that. You get a grid and a problem and 100 lives, and you do the only thing there is to do, which has become the calmest voice anyone can hear. All stations, Iron Lady, I said, and I heard my own voice go flat and level, the voice I do not choose. I have eyes on. Everybody stop moving and listen to me. The net went quiet. That is the strange power of it. A dozen terrified men, and you say stop in the right voice, and they stop. I talked them out. That is the whole of it, and it is everything. I could see what none of them could see from inside the dust, the shape of the ground, where the squad was, where the range fans were, where it was safe to move, and where it absolutely was not. I brought my aircraft down low and slow over the wash. Not because I needed to, but because a squad in the dust needs to see the aircraft, needs the shadow of it to pass over them so they know someone above can see them. And I put myself between those men and every bad option. And I walked them, one team at a time, up out of the wash and onto clean ground, and I kept the medical bird informed and the range hotline honest and my voice flat the entire time. While the man in the vehicle was pulled free and turned out to have a broken arm and a set of cracked ribs and nothing that would not heal. I gave them small instructions, one at a time, because a frightened person cannot hold a big instruction. Second team, do not move yet. First team, you are going to walk toward the sound of my aircraft, not away from the truck, toward me, 10 steps, and stop. Good. Now the rest of you. Nobody runs. We do this at a walk. There was a corporal down there, trying to be a hero, trying to climb back toward the rolled vehicle, because he thought someone was still in it, and I put the aircraft directly over his head and told him, by name once I had it, that the vehicle was clear, that the crew was out, that his job right now was to get his team onto the high clean ground and count heads, and that I would not leave until he had. I do not raise my voice for this. The opposite. The worse it gets, the flatter I get, until my voice is the one still thing in a moving world, and men reach for it like a handrail in the dark. It took 11 minutes, it felt like 11 seconds, and it felt like a year, the way these things always do, occupying no time and all of time at once. Nobody died in that wash. It could have gone the other way in a dozen places. It did not, because there was an aircraft overhead, flown by someone who had done this before, on a day when people did die, and who had learned on that day exactly what her voice was for. And down in the dust, my brother Cole stood with his hand on a younger Marine's shoulder and listened to the flat, certain voice that had just walked him out of the worst 30 seconds of his career. And he heard the range control call that aircraft by name, and the name was Iron Lady, and it was his sister. He told me later that he sat down right there in the dirt when the aircraft finally climbed away and could not get up for a minute. That evening, they gathered both units in the big equipment bay because the workup was paused for the safety stand-down, and First Sergeant Reyes asked the battalion commander for 2 minutes, and the commander, who knew more than the young Marines did, gave him the floor. Reyes was not a talker. You could see it cost him to stand up in front of that many people. He held his cover in his 2 hands, and he looked at the floor for a second, and then he looked up and found me at the back of the bay, where I had gone to be small out of habit, and he did not let me be small. 13 years ago, I was a sergeant, he said, on a ridge in Helmand, and my platoon was pinned and we were going to die there. That is not a figure of speech. We had run the math, and the math said we were not getting off that hill. And there was a section of Cobras on station, and one by one the reasons to leave stacked up. Fuel. Fire coming up at them we could see from the ground, tracers going up like somebody tipped a bucket. The other aircraft took damage and had to break off. And one bird would not leave. The bay was dead silent. I looked at the floor. She stayed, Reyes said, when staying was the wrong math. When every rule and every reasonable voice said break off, she brought that aircraft around again and again, and she put her guns between us and the thing that was going to kill us, and she did it low enough that they were hitting her the whole time. She took a round through the cockpit that killed the man in her front seat. And she stayed anyway. She got us off that hill. Every single one of us walked because one pilot decided the math was wrong. He looked around the bay at the young faces, at the ones who had been in the wash that afternoon. Some of you were down in that wash today, he said. You heard a voice come over the net and tell you to stop moving, and you stopped because there are voices you obey without deciding to. That voice. That is the same voice 13 young men heard on the worst day of their lives, on the far side of the world. It is the same person. She has been that person the whole time. The only thing that changed today is that a few of you found out. His jaw worked. I found out 4 nights ago, at a party. When a good young sergeant, a sergeant I respect, thought the funniest thing in the room was making her say her own name. He had to stop. A first sergeant, 40 years old, and he had to stop and get himself back. We never knew her face, he said. You do not, on the radio. We knew 2 words, and we said those 2 words to each other for years, at reunions, at funerals, when somebody's kid was born. Iron Lady. Like a prayer, we did not know who to send it to. He looked at me. I have been trying to find out who to say thank you to for 13 years, and last week a sergeant in my company made her say her call sign at a party like it was a joke. He turned and he looked at my brother, and it was not cruel, and that was what made it unbearable. It was just true. Then the battalion adjutant read the citation, short and clean, the way they are meant to be read. The province, the date, the autumn of 2013, the act in that flat, careful language. The distinguished flying cross with combat valor. And near the end, the thing I had left a drawer open for, the name of the man who had been in my front seat, read out loud in a room full of Marines who took their covers off when they heard it. Captain Nathan Poole, the adjutant read, who was lost that day. I said his name in my head along with him. Nathan. I had not been able to say it out loud in 13 years. Somebody else had just said it for me in front of 200 Marines, and the sound of it went through me like weather. My brother found me outside the bay afterward, in the dark, by the aircraft. He looked like a man who had been in a car accident. That is the only way I can describe it. Hollowed out and moving carefully, like he was not sure all his parts were still attached. He stopped a few feet away, and he could not look at me at first, and when he did, his eyes were wet and furious, though the fury was all aimed inward, which was new for him. I made you say it, he said. His voice was not working right. At the party, I made you say it like it was a punchline, in front of the guy you saved. I made a joke, and the punchline was the best thing anybody in our family has ever done. And I didn't. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand against his mouth. You could have told me, he said. All these years, you could have shut me up any time you wanted. Why didn't you ever tell me? And here's the thing I had learned standing at that rail 4 nights before with a name in my mouth. I did not rescue him from it. My whole life I had rushed to make my family comfortable, to smooth the thing over, to be so good at letting it go. I loved my brother. I love him still. But I did not step in and tell him it was fine, because it was not fine, and telling him it was fine would have been one more time I made myself small so that he could feel better. Because you should have wanted to know, I said, not who I was to those men, who I was to you. You never once asked me what I did up there, Cole. Not because I hid it, because you already knew it didn't count. He flinched like I had hit him. He did not argue. That was the first new thing between us in 30 years, that he did not argue. Dad, he started and then stopped because he was beginning, right there in the dark, to understand where the verdict had come from, and how young he had been when he swallowed it, and that it had never actually been his. I know, I said. It wasn't yours to begin with. But it's yours now. What you do with it. We stood there in the dark a while. Somewhere behind us, the equipment bay was emptying out. Boots on concrete, low voices, the particular hush of Marines who have just been handed something too big to be loud about. Cole wiped his face with the back of his wrist, the way he did when he was small and did not want anyone to see. "When the truck went over today," he said, "I was in that wash. I heard you tell me to stop moving. I didn't know it was you. I just knew I'd do anything the voice said." He let out a breath that shook. "I've spent my whole life thinking the people up in the aircraft weren't really in it with us. And today the person who kept my whole squad from doing something stupid in that wash was my sister. And I didn't even know it was her. I just knew she was the calmest thing in the world, and I trusted her with my life." He looked at me. "How long have you been that person? And I never knew." "The whole time, Cole," I said, and it came out softer than I meant it to. "I've been that person the whole time." Behind him, Reyes had come out of the bay, and he saw us, and he stopped at a distance to give us the space, but I called him over because I had waited 13 years, and I did not want to wait anymore. He came, and he stood in front of me, and he did not know what to do with his hands. "First sergeant," I said. "Ma'am," he said, "I've owed you a thank you since I was a sergeant, and I'm sorry it came with your brother's boot on it." He reached into his cami pocket and took out a coin, worn smooth at the edges from 13 years of being carried, and he pressed it into my hand. "The platoon had these made. There were 12 of us who came home. We each carry one. This one was going to my grave with me until I found out who to give it to." I closed my hand around it. It was warm from his pocket. Off to the side, the young Lance Corporal, Hale, the one who had laughed loudest at the party, was standing at a distance, holding his cover in both hands. He had been trying to work up the nerve for a while. When Reyes stepped back, the kid came forward, and he could barely get the words out. "Ma'am," he said, "I laughed at the party. I laughed the loudest. I didn't know." His ears were red. My whole life, I wanted to do something that mattered, and I stood in a room with somebody who did, and I laughed at her. "I'm real sorry, ma'am." I looked at him, all 21 years of him, so afraid he had ruined something. "You didn't know," I said. "That's the whole point, Lance Corporal. Nobody ever knows. The person cleaning the mess hall, the one processing the paperwork nobody thanks them for, the quiet one at the party. You never know what somebody carried before you met them." I let that sit. So the move is to not need to know. Treat the quiet ones like they might be the most dangerous person in the room. Sometimes they are. He nodded like I had handed him something heavy and important, which I suppose I had. He would carry it. I could see that he would carry it, and that alone was almost worth the party. Some debts, I understood then, get paid in full, and some of them do not get paid at all. They just, finally, after a long time, get named. I want to be honest with you about what the recognition did and did not do, because I think we tell ourselves a lie about moments like that one. We tell ourselves that if the truth would just come out, if the people who diminished us could just see, everything would be made right. And there is a version of that which is real. Something in my chest that had been clenched for 13 years did let go, a little in that equipment bay, when 200 Marines took their covers off at a dead man's name. I will not pretend it did not. To be seen after a lifetime of folding yourself small is a warm thing. And I sat in the warm of it for a while, and I let myself. But I flew home from that workup, and a week later I was back in my quarters, and the drawer was still open, and Nathan Poole was still not in it. That is the arithmetic no citation fixes. There were 12 coins because there were 12 men who came home off that ridge. There was no coin for the man in my front seat. His name was Nathan Poole, and he was 28 years old, and he had a laugh you could hear across a flight line, and a daughter who was 2 when he died and is 15 now. And no amount of a room full of Marines saying my call sign like a prayer brings him into a room. Recognition is a warm room. It is not the same as the seat that stays empty at the table. I took the coin Reyes gave me, and I put it in the drawer next to the citation. And I sat with the two of them for a long time. And what I understood, sitting there, was how much of my restraint over the years had not been discipline at all. I had told myself it was discipline. The quiet competence, the holding steady, the being so good at letting it go. Some of it was, but a lot of it was armor. I had been wearing armor at my own family's kitchen table, at cookouts, at a party 4 nights ago, armor against people who were never actually going to hit me, only ever going to overlook me. And armor is heavy, and I had been carrying it so long I had stopped feeling the weight until the moment somebody finally lifted it off and I felt how tired my shoulders were. For a few days after the workup, I kept waiting to feel triumphant, because I thought that was what was supposed to come next. The story we are all handed says that when the truth finally wins, when the room finally turns, when the doubters are finally silenced, the wronged person gets to feel a clean, bright thing called vindication. I kept checking for it the way you check a pocket for keys. It was not there. What was there instead was something quieter and much harder to hold. A kind of grief that had been waiting underneath the armor the whole time for me to have a free hand to feel it. Because here is what being seen actually did. It took away the job I had been using to avoid the grief. For 13 years, my grief for Nathan Poole had a task, and the task was to stay hidden, and staying hidden takes work. And the work had filled the space where the mourning should have gone. Now the whole thing was out in the light. His name had been read in a bay full of Marines. There was nothing left to hide, and so there was nothing left to do but the one thing I had been avoiding by hiding, which was to actually miss him. To sit in a room and feel the size of the hole. Being right about the ridge did not make me whole. It just let me set the armor down. Those are not the same thing, and anybody who tells you they are has never had to wear it. But there was one thing that did begin to close, slowly, over the weeks that followed, and it was the seam. The split I told you about, the major in the aircraft and the sister at the table, the two women I had kept so carefully apart that I could be both in one room and feel nothing tear. After that workup, they stopped being two women. I would be at the grocery store, ordinary, in civilian clothes, and I would catch myself standing the way I stand on a flight line, and instead of correcting it, instead of folding back down into the smaller shape, I would just let it be. I let the pilot walk around inside my regular life. I let her answer the phone. I let her sit at my mother's table at the next holiday and take up exactly as much room as she takes up. No more and no less. And the strange thing, the thing I did not see coming, is that nobody minded. The people who love you can usually stand the full size of you. It is only ever you who assumed they could not. I found the old squadron photograph while I was looking for the citation frame. The one from Helmand, all of us squinting in that white light. Nathan Poole in the middle with his arms slung around a plane captain, mid-laugh, forever. I had kept that photograph face down in a box for 13 years. I set it up on the shelf next to the framed citation, face up where the light hits it in the morning. Some days it makes me sad. Most days it just makes me glad I knew him. That, I have decided, is what healing actually looks like. Not the absence of the hole, the willingness to keep the photograph face up. The deployment came, the way deployments do, and my section flew for my brother's battalion for the better part of a year, and I brought his Marines home to their families, and I brought some of them home in a way I do not talk about, and that is a different story than this one. But I will tell you one thing from it, because it belongs here. Somewhere in the middle of that year, on a night when a patrol got into more than it could handle, I was overhead again, and one of the voices on the ground calling for my guns was my brother's. He did not say, "Sister." He did not say anything but the words he was trained to say. Grid and situation, and the flat professional language of a man asking for help. But I knew his voice the way you know your own brother's voice, and he knew mine. And for the length of that engagement, we were exactly what we should have been to each other the whole time. Not the real Marine and the bus driver, just a Marine on the ground who needed the sky and the sky arriving. When it was over and his patrol was clear, he keyed the net one last time, and instead of the standard thanks, he said, "Appreciate it, Iron Lady." And there was something in how he said the name, careful, almost reverent, that told me he finally understood what it cost to earn it. I did not answer with anything but any time. You do not get sentimental on a tactical net. But I flew home that night lighter than I had flown in 13 years. Cole came back a different kind of sergeant, and then a staff sergeant, and the Marines who serve under him will never know that the way he leads them, the particular respect he shows to every job on the battlefield, the pilots and the mechanics and the corpsmen and the men who never fire a shot, was purchased at the price of a lifetime of getting it wrong about his own sister, and one bad joke at a party, and the long work of unlearning what our father put in him before he was old enough to choose. He got it back. That is the thing about my brother that I did not expect and am most grateful for. When he finally saw, he did not defend himself. He changed. Not everyone can. He could. But before all of that, in the weeks between the workup and the flight overseas, something happened between Cole and me that I did not expect. And it is the reason I am telling you this at all. He came to see me, not to apologize again. He had apologized, badly and then well, and I had let him, and that was done. He came with a six-pack and a folding chair, and he sat down in front of my quarters like he used to sit on the kitchen floor when he was 9. And he said the thing I had wanted to hear my whole life, without ever knowing I was waiting for it. "Tell me about the ridge," he said. "Not the citation, the real one. I want to know what happened up there." He turned the bottle in his hands. "Teach me to see it. I spent my whole life not seeing it, and I don't want to be that guy anymore. I want to earn the version of you I ignored." So I told him. I told my little brother about the tracers coming up like somebody tipped a bucket, and about the front seat going quiet, and about the decision to come around one more time when the math said run, and about flying a broken aircraft home with a dead friend in front of me and a dozen strangers alive behind me because of it. He listened the way I had waited 30 years for him to listen. He cried, and he did not try to hide it, and when I was done he was quiet for a long while. "Dad was wrong," he said finally. "He was wrong, and he was my hero, and both of those are true, and I have to figure out how to hold both." He looked at me. "I'm going to be a different kind of sergeant. I've got Marines who watched you walk them out of that wash. I'm going to teach them there's no such thing as the lesser fight, that the mud and the air are the same war." He almost smiled. I've got a lot of unlearning to do. Our father, when the story reached him, did not fully understand it. I want to be honest about that too, because I know some of you are waiting for the scene where the old man weeps and takes it all back, and life mostly does not give you that scene. He heard the pieces of it from my mother, and the next time I saw him, he held my hand a little longer than usual, and he said, gruffly, that he had heard I had done all right over there. Stay up where it's safe had become done all right over there. From my father, that was a mountain moving 1 inch. I took the inch. I have made my peace with the fact that the inch is all there is going to be, and that it is still, somehow, enough, because I no longer need him to set the value of what I did. I know what it was worth. The 12 men with the coins know. That is enough. And I finally did the thing I had been not doing for 13 years. I drove out to see Nathan Poole's family, in the daylight. I had sent cards, and I had stayed away, because staying away had felt like the only way to survive it. His widow met me at the door, and she knew me before I said a word, because she had heard my call sign her whole marriage, and then her whole widowhood, the 2 words the men said, like a prayer, and she put her arms around me on the porch, and we stood there a while. She was not angry. I had been so afraid for 13 years that she would be angry, that she would look at me and see the pilot who came home when her husband did not, and instead she held on to me on that porch like I was a piece of him that had finally come back. His daughter is 15. She has his laugh. I sat in their kitchen and I told them, out loud in the light, what her father did in the front seat of my aircraft. I told the girl the things a 15-year-old needs to hear about a father she cannot remember, that he was funny, that he was brave in the specific, unglamorous way that actually matters, that in the last minutes of his life, he was doing his job well and thinking about the men on the ground and not about himself. I told her that the reason a whole battalion says 2 words like a prayer is that her father helped earn those words, and that half of them belonged to him. I said his name as many times as I could, because I had been keeping it in a drawer for 13 years, and it deserved to be in the air, in a kitchen, in the daylight, in front of the girl who has his laugh. Before I left, his widow gave me a photograph of him, the one from the flight line with the grin you could hear, and she said, "He used to say the pilot in his back seat was the best stick in the Marine Corps. He said you were fearless." She held my hands. "Be fearless a little longer for us. Go home and hang up that citation where you can see it." When I got home that night, I took the citation out of the drawer and I framed it and I hung it on the wall where I would see it every morning. Not for the ribbon, for the name near the bottom. The drawer stays open now. I want to say one thing to you, whoever you are, before I let you go. If the people who are supposed to love you keep handing you a smaller version of yourself, a version that is easier for them to stand next to, you do not owe them the shrinking. I spent 30 years believing that being good meant being quiet, that keeping the peace meant keeping myself small, that the kindest thing I could do was to let the people I loved go on believing I was less than I was so they would not have to feel it. I was wrong. That is not peace. That is just a slow way of disappearing. You can be quiet and still be the exact size you are. You do not have to make a scene, and you do not have to make yourself a stranger to your own life either. You can simply let the truth stand in the room without apologizing for the space it takes up. Say your own name plainly, the way you would say it to a stranger, and let the people who love you catch up to it in their own time. Some of them will. Some of them will only move an inch. But the truth does not need you to defend it or perform it or shrink it down to fit. It can hold its own weight. I know that now. I learned it late in a loud room with a cold cup of coffee in my hand when a first sergeant I had never met stood up at the sound of 2 words and reminded me who I had been all along. My name is Delaney Cross. I fly attack helicopters for the United States Marine Corps, and the men who matter most to me call me Iron Lady. They always did. I was just the last one to say it out loud.